Hi, welcome to my poppy video. This is a carry-on from an in-person class I've recently done with a bee and a flower, and it's just going over the poppy again because sometimes we can run out of time at the end of these workshops. We get really stuck into doing the bee. So I've done a video and it's just going over this orange poppy and how I would do it. So when I'm doing workshops in person, to try and keep continuity with the piece that we're drawing and reduce confusion, because there's a lot of different pencils and they can all look the same, they're all numbered so that we can tell them apart, but you can end up with a load of reds and oranges and yellows on the desk and using the wrong ones for different parts. So because of that, I tend to keep the palette quite restricted for workshops. Using the colours that we have to hand, I've developed this poppy tutorial. If I was to just do this poppy at home, I would probably use some different colours, but because, as I say, it was written for a workshop, we're using some colours that we've already used in the bee. It'll also tie the drawing together quite nicely by doing that, instead of having a bee done in certain yellows and oranges and brown reds, and then doing the poppy in some different colours. They can sometimes look like they're from different drawings if you don't tie in the same colours and tones, so it is quite nice to use some of the same colours in all areas of your drawing, just to bring it together. So all I'm doing at the minute is I'm putting in the shadows, the dark areas of the poppy, and I'm using the side of a pencil. You can see that this pencil, 283 Faber-Castell, is quite sharp. I've got quite a long nib on it, and what it's allowing me to do is press the pencil on the flat edge, and I'm getting a nice soft application of pastel there. And by doing this, we'll be able to blend future layers into this very nicely without getting stuck with really harsh shadows that can sometimes just be unblendable and will ruin your drawing. So it's really useful to practice shading on the side of the pencil to get these soft edges. And I'm in the process at the minute of recording some higher quality videos, which are going to be going on my website in an art school I'm creating. And on there, I'm going to have some technique classes to really get good pencil control, and that follows through for the rest of your drawings. If you've got some core techniques and skills and know what the pastel can do for you, and also know where you've gone wrong but why you've gone wrong, that's when you can really take autonomy over your own drawing. You won't need me as much, and you'll be able to pick your own subjects and understand how to start them, how to pick your palette, and which techniques are going to be best suited for it as well. I've also recently enjoyed drawing flowers more on the pastel map paper than the pastel map board. I found that you can get softer edges. However, you've got to be careful. You can't add as many layers to this. So it's all swings and roundabouts really, and lots of learning curves. So I've gone in now with my next colour, my next tone, 182. This is slightly lighter, and the 283, the first pencil we used, as you can see, is very red. It's brown, but it's very red. This colour, the 182, is heading towards orange and ochres and golds now, which is great because we want to get towards yellow. So what I'm doing with a slightly lighter pencil is I'm glazing over the top of that first layer. I'm unifying it all, and I'm working into those soft edges so that I'm creating a base, an underpainting that we can add future colours and tones to, and these can all mix into, which is really useful. And I'm already thinking about some of the edges and making sure I'm being quite neat on the outside edges. These are dark colours we're working with, and although the putty rubber can take pastel out, it's going to struggle to completely get rid of these darker marks, so you want to take care. So yes, I'm just working over these darker areas. We've got quite a few more lighter tones to add in, so you don't need to worry about covering in the whole of the poppy. This petal I've covered in just now, I've coloured in. This is a very dark petal on the photo, so that is why I've completely covered it with the 182. The other poppies have got more light hitting them, so I'm focusing on glazing over the 283, that first colour that we put down. I'm pushing it back, I'm reducing its intensity, and then I'm extending the edges. There, I'm making the edges broader with this lighter pencil so that the other colours will again blend into this pencil. It's edges into edges, making sure they're really nice and soft. And not adding too much pastel at this stage. You'll see I go back in with the same pencils, these same pencils, as the tutorial carries on. And I like to work in this way. I think it is the best way to work. Build something up in layers. Don't go in really strong with your shadows and midtones first. You want to put them in, obviously, like I am doing. But it's easier to add more of these darker tones than take them out. Pastel is not forgiving in terms of if you've put a lot of dark in, you can't get it out and put a lot of light on top. You'll never get back to that freshness of putting light on clean card. So you just want to be careful where you're putting your tones. Again, this just comes with practice. So I'm going in now with the Bister, which is our Creta colour pencil, and you can see I'm adding some low lights to this dark petal with the Bister. Because I've already got quite a lot of pastel down, this is mixing in really nicely. You can also see that this pencil is absolutely tiny and not sharp at all. I can't sharpen this pencil because it is so small, and I find the Creta colours do break quite a bit, but some of their pastels, some of their colours are really wonderful to have in your palette and have at your disposal, and particularly this Bister is extremely useful. So what I'm doing is I'm going around these edges, which I was just talking about with those first two pastels, and I'm blending into them, and this is giving me a base to work into for our lighter colours. So the petal that's dark and is closest to us, that's almost finished now because it is quite dark. We haven't got a wide variety of tones to add into all of that petal, but these other petals, these have got a lot more pastel to be added into. They're catching a lot more light. I'm pressing fairly hard with this Bister now because this is a safe colour and a safe tone to be adding in. You want to fill the card quite well so that we haven't got patches of blue showing through. So I'm just going to speed up here and add in the rest. So for the areas which are in shadow, the Bister is showing up as a highlight. And for the areas which are in full sunshine, the Bister is acting as the mid-tone, the base to blend into, which is quite an interesting thing to think about and shows you that working in tone in black and white can really give you a lot of information for how tone transfers depending on how you're looking at it. So what I mean by this is you've probably seen those little optical illusions where you've got a checkerboard and they say, believe it or not, this square closest to us is the same tone as the square right over there at the back, but they appear different colours. And this is about transfer. So if we've got something that's really dark and we put mid-tone, we're working on a scale of 1 to 10, and we put our mid-tone down on that really dark background, it's going to show up as quite light. If we go to the other end of the scale and put that mid-tone down on something that's almost white, it's going to look really dark. And that sounds very obvious, but when you're working in colour, it's quite easy to forget about the light and the dark. So while you're doing this, Poppy, really think about, okay, this Bister is showing up light here, it's showing up dark over there. How can I transfer that into my other drawings? You don't need to overplay your highlights in the shadows. You want to use something that is quite muted actually. So what I'm doing now, I'm going back in with the other pencils, this is 182, and I'm re-establishing those darker areas on the light petals, like here, and I'm also going back into the dark petals and I'm just filling in all of the paper. We don't want the blue showing through. And around the edges of the 182, go back in with that Bister. So around the edges of the first pencil, the 283, we go around with the 182. Around the edges of the 182, we go around with the Bister. And around the Bister, we'll go in with a yellow, and so on and so forth. We're working up in tones, and we're not making huge jumps because it will make the petal look very stiff and forced. We want this to be really soft and gentle. So you can see here I'm pressing really hard and properly filling in the pastel mat. There's actually pastel dust on there. That's how you know you're pressing hard enough. This is the first pencil, the dark 283, and I'm just very lightly glazing in some more of the shadows, just going back and re-establishing them. Because we've got even more pastel down, again, these lines are really soft. I'm still using the pencil on the side as well to get soft edges. So this is the 182 again, so I'm just going back over those darks that I just put back in, making sure they're fitting into the rest of the drawing, they're not standing out. And here's the bistre again, that mid-tone, which in the shadows appears like a highlight, and in the highlights appears like the mid-tone, the base of the flower. So you can see you don't need to throw the whole box of pencils at a drawing to get all the right tones and shades. I would really recommend, especially when you're learning, embracing a limited palette and not using very many pencils. You will learn much more, you'll get much better drawings. If we threw every orange and yellow that I had at my disposal into this flower, it would end up looking completely ridiculous and it would have far too much going on. So less is more. So this is the 184, so this is the first proper splash of yellow that we've actually put into the poppy, and it will show up as very intense and very bright on your drawing, so you don't need to press too hard to start with. Like everything else, we'll go back in and slowly build it up, checking as we go that we're not adding too much. But the important thing, as with all of these layers, which actually I haven't mentioned yet but you can see, is I'm working with the direction of the petal on all of these really beautiful flowing marks. I always think it looks like silk, and that is something to aim for, is that we're looking at something that's very soft and gentle, and it's a soft breeze would easily just ruffle these petals. So we want to get that type of feeling. The only way we're going to get that is by having soft edges, and you can see that all of these little folds in the petal, it's giving our flower a really lovely movement to it. So that's very important. We don't want to end up with something that's stiff and appears to be unnatural. So all of these lovely flowing marks on each petal, they need to follow the same direction. They just fan out from the center of the flower. So this is where our layers are really holding up the structure of the flower. If we were to go over with that 184, that bright yellow that I just put in, and we were to cover up all of our previous layers, then we wouldn't have these flowing marks on the petals. So you need to allow areas of each previous layer to show through and not cover them all up. And again, you saw me going in very briefly with the bistre. So as I said, you go from the darker pencil to the slightly lighter pencil to the bistre to the yellow. If you put in a yellow mark and you think it's too harsh, you can knock it back with the previous pencil with the bistre and mix it back in. So the two petals I first worked on, these two petals are those which are mostly catching the light. So we really want to put quite a lot of yellow into those. Again with the bistre, just adding more very gentle lowlights into those darker petals. I did add a little bit of the yellow into that dark petal, but not very much. Please don't go and add loads of yellow because you'll ruin the structure of the flower. These petals need to be dark. So I'm being very constrained when I'm adding bright areas onto shaded petals. You can see I've hardly added anything, but because the edges are quite soft and it's very measured where I've put it, it's more than enough. So I'm just going in with the 283, that dark burgundy, and I'm adding the centre to the flower. And all I'm doing for that is pressing very hard in the crease between the petals and then just blending it out. You can see it all just comes down to pencil control, and that here I'm using the side of the pencil, but obviously not as broad a part of the pencil, and I'm just lifting it off the page every time I finish a mark, and that is giving me those really soft controlled edges. And I'm still working in the direction of the petals as well, which is really important. I'm creating all of those really lovely flowing lines. So once again, moving back to the 182, this is what I quite like about being able to film myself working. In workshops, it is, right, we take this pencil, then this pencil, then this pencil, because otherwise we'd just never get anywhere. But the luxury of watching me work real time is that you can see you don't need to follow regimented instructions, and feel free to pick up those pencils at your disposal. I will constantly work backwards and forwards, rendering and re-rendering areas until they sit correctly. And this is all just about seeing and looking and constantly scrutinizing what you're looking at. So if you follow any of my online tutorials, don't be afraid to think, well, I've done that step and now I'm several steps ahead, but you know what, that shadow doesn't look dark enough. I won't go back to it because Emily hasn't told me to. Go back to it and add it in and see what happens. It's really important to keep working and reworking until you're happy with it. Obviously you can overwork drawings, but that is how we learn. And I'm not at all afraid to say that certainly when I started doing this a few years ago, a lot of my drawings weren't successful. I overworked them, but that's how I really got to understand the medium, the pastel that I'm working with and what I can do with it. So I would totally encourage you to buy some pastel matte paper because it is a bit cheaper than the board, and do quite a lot of experimental drawings on it. Maybe follow some of my tutorials to get you going, and then see what you can do with them. See what happens if you make that shadow darker. What happens if you put this colour or this tone down first, and why have I told you to do it the other way around? Can you figure it out? And that would be really great for you to then be able to go and do your own drawings and understand how the pastel can work for you. So I'm pressing quite hard now. I want these highlights to show up on the brighter petals. This is the lemon colour, and now I'm going in with the ivory, the 103. So the ivory is going to be our brightest colour for this flower. I'm not going in with the white. The white I think would have just been too harsh. There's no colour, obviously no pigment in the white, it's pure tone, and I think it would have been a bit cold. So the ivory is a really nice compromise, and I'm being selective where I put it. The brighter you go, the more selective you need to be. You need to work in a smaller area. If we were to cover all of the highlighted petal in the ivory, it would become flat. And it would become flat because you can't go anywhere from ivory apart from down. So you're basically saying this whole petal is completely saturated in sunlight, and it wouldn't make any sense to the rest of the drawing. So you just want to pick out those very brightest areas, and it's quite nice to trail it along part of the edge of the petal as well, and it would just delicately ruffle an edge. I wouldn't, if you're going to do that, I wouldn't trail the ivory along an entire edge of the petal. Just pick out little bits and it will keep a nice fluid movement to it. So you can see I'm doing that here with the yellow. I'm picking out a part of the edge of this shaded petal, and it's just given it a little bit more movement and dimension, but I haven't run that pencil across the entire edge of the dark petal. So I'm glazing over these lighter areas with that 184 now, which is the yellow, just to put a little bit more pigment in there. And when I mean glaze, glazing is tinting or shading something. So if we're working into white, which we are here, or almost white, we're tinting it with a bit more pigment. It's going to warm it up and make sure that it looks correct with the rest of the poppy. I'm going in now and just adding that poppy stem. Now this should be the 173. I have no idea what I've done with my 173. It's wandered off somewhere. So I've done it in a dark green, which is similar, but it's more of a forest green than a nice moss green. Definitely use the 173, it's much nicer. And then I'm going along that edge with 168 or similar. So it's basically a light zesty green, like a May green if you've got the Derwents. And you just want to put these lighter tones and colours on one edge, the edge that is catching the sun. So the lemon here, just finish that off really nicely, and it ties in with what we're seeing on the petals. And then definitely, to finish off any drawing, go around with your putty rubber. When you're using a putty rubber, be careful because they can dump pastel back onto your drawing if you get an edge really dirty, and I've done that quite a few times. So I'm just going over with clean edges of the putty rubber and cleaning up all of the little marks that you probably can't even see on the camera. So that is the finished result with a bee. I hope you enjoyed doing this, and if you've got any questions, send me an email and I will get back to you when I can. If you want more tutorials, I have just released today a poppy for the Poppy Appeal. So it's a lovely red poppy, and there's a little competition attached to that as well, and there's several more on my website. If you'd like to know about my online art school, which is coming out soon, then you can sign up to my waitlist, which is again on the homepage of my website. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.